It is a scam when you don't allow everyone to operate on fair terms.
We are the Robin Hoods of sports betting. We take something back from the rich bookies and enable our customers to beat them instead.
Hi guys, Alex here. Welcome to episode 40 of the Trademate Sports Betting Podcast. Coming at you again with a preview of the UFC, this time UFC 252, headlined by Daniel Cormier and Stipe Miocic, joined once again by smart sports trader Ryan Bruno. How are you, mate?
I'm good, mate. Thank you for having me on.
No, mate, anytime. It was good fun last time and lots of great insight, more so towards the start of the podcast. We went through a lot of... just went the ins and outs of MMA betting, not too much, but I think it's a good listen for anyone who's interested in MMA betting and wants some deeper insight into how you should approach MMA, UFC, that kind of stuff. But today, I guess we're more focused on, the card that's coming up. I do have a few questions for you before we get to an actual preview of UFC 252. But actually, I thought we'd add in a UFC quiz question, Matt. I didn't tell you this. I don't know if you saw that in our notes,
right.
but we do a football quiz question on the preview with Haru and George every Thursday. So I thought I'd add a UFC one in this week. I think might be quite easy for you, mate. But the quiz question for the week is name the three fighters that have beat Stipe Miocic. So, mate, hold your answer for now, and we'll get back to it at the end of the podcast. Just a little tactic to make sure everyone listens to the end.
That's a good tactic, yeah. I mean, the first one's pretty obvious, right? Because it's DC, Miocic, the trilogy. Yeah. But yeah.
The other two are a little bit more difficult. One of them is actually quite surprising for a lot of people. But mate, first question I wanted to ask: we've kind of swapped back in between fights in Vegas, fights in Fight Island, and Fight Island had the big cage. Now we're back in the UFC, back in Vegas, with the smaller cage. There's lots of theories around this. I'd like to just hear what you think the finish. There's lots of people saying that the finishing rate has been basically the same, but this is only over the last couple of months. But overall, is there a definite trend that there are more finishes in a smaller cage?
I don't know, to be honest. It's not something that I don't really dig into that type of data too much with UFC, because I think every fight you've just got to take it as an individual fight, really. And then the data can be skewed a lot as well, because, for example, you might just in that period where you've got guys fighting in a small cage, you might just have a lot of guys that have a high finishing rate, or you might have more heavyweight fights rather than the lighter weight fights where you don't get as many finishes. So unless you really spend a lot of time digging into that data, then I don't know. I don't think it'd be that useful for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, you would think that it favours wrestlers. Logically, it makes sense.
Yeah, so guys that like to push people up against the cage, so like a Khabib style fighter, or even a guy that's fighting this weekend like Merab Dvalishvili, I think that's his name. He's quite, the way he fights, he likes to get guys against the cage, and obviously if it's smaller, you've got less distance, so it's easier to do that. So that's why I like to look at things on a fight-by-fight basis rather than say, the finishing rate is 5% more in a smaller cage. It always depends who's fighting, really.
Yeah, no, you would think, Stipe Miocic's got decent wrestling, but you would think the smaller cage should favour Daniel Cormier this weekend. But yeah, it's hard to say, isn't it? There probably is data around it, but we'd have to go look into that ourselves. My other question I had for you was more around live betting. I told you before the podcast, before we started recording, that my sample size is extremely low, but I've recently, in the last month or so, started doing some live betting. I live bet Usman versus Masvidal, and also this weekend Weidman versus I can't even remember his name.
Akhmedov.
Yeah,
Omari Akhmedov, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was it. But yeah, and I've seen it. Just seems like it's really inefficient. The odds are, in my opinion, the odds were way too high. I don't know if in these cases you kind of think, all right, I'm really missing something here because it's way higher than I think it should be, or do you think they're just extremely inefficient?
No, I think you're right. I think there are some cases where they are just extremely inefficient. And like you say, it's quite a tough job for the bookmakers, They've got to price these fights as they're going on, and then they've got like a 1 minute period to set the odds between rounds. So they've got money flying in from, different sides, and then sometimes they're going to open themselves up for bbig arbitrage bets as well. You see that happening. So it is an area where, if your knowledge of MMA betting is decent, or your knowledge of MMA is good, then you should be able to pick up some like big value odds. One of the most recent ones I can remember was Greg Hardy fought, can't remember his opponent. It was the first fight in lockdown, but anyway, it was like Greg Hardy versus, what's the dude's name?
Did he win?
Australian guy.
It was what do they call him?
Can't remember.
The Wombat. Is that Ben Solioli? Or
yeah,
something?
that's it. Yeah. Oh no, it was the guy. I think it was the guy after that. That was Ben Sassoli, was it? But the guy after that, he fought, and the guy was landing some decent leg kicks in round one, and then Joe Rogan just picked up this narrative that Greg Hardy's leg was, battered and it was affecting him, and it wasn't really. You could watch the fight, but the other guy won the first round, and then the second round, Greg Hardy came back in, looked really strong, and he won that round. And the other guy looked gassed. He just completely stopped throwing, but you could get Greg Hardy at the end of round two at like 1.8, which made no sense to me, because his opponent had just like stopped throwing strikes and just looked really fatigued, and then he went on and dominated the third round. So sometimes you'll see something and you might kind of question yourself. But yeah, there are just like huge value odds sometimes.
Yeah, so my situation in Usman Masvidal, although I only got really short odds of like 1.36, I think it was, or something like that. Even though it's quite short, mate, it was like 2.5, 3 rounds in, I believe. And by that stage, everyone, you'd seen Usman had settled into his rhythm. Masvidal's chance of a knockout like hugely reduced, and 1.36. When you match that up against the actual probability, was way too high. And then the same on the weekend with Weidman. I bet him actually after the first round, but I could have bet him after the second round, and but it didn't look as likely then. I think after the second round, Weidman was like 3.0.
Was it?
Yeah, but I stupidly, obviously the bet still won, but I still bet after the first round. I think it was 1.6, and he dominated, maybe not dominated, but he easily won the first round. So I thought 1.6 with 2 rounds left, veteran like Weidman, his chin looked like it was holding up pretty decent. So I don't know. I think it's just something that people can exploit going forward, or at least at the moment.
Definitely, yeah.
And the one I took with Weidman was on Betfair too, so it wasn't even really a...
Oh, was it? You used the exchange, yeah.
Yeah, it was on the exchange, so it wasn't even like a Pinnacle setting the price really poorly or anything like that.
Yeah, the exchange can be kind of hit and miss, because sometimes the liquidity is there and sometimes it's not there. So for the bigger fights, it's pretty much always there. But then other times I've had to use like soft bookmakers like a Bet365 or someone who tend to, always have the lines up. But Betfair can be good because you can put up your own odds, and then, if somebody's watching the fight, they might kind of be a recreational punter. They might just, grab it.
Yeah, no, good point, mate. All right, let's get stuck into UFC 252 then, mate. Before we go, they haven't even set up a lineup yet defined. Maybe they have right now, but when I looked 2 hours ago, they hadn't. So the 4 fights I wanted to go through, I think the 4 most interesting ones are Dodson, Dashvili, Dos Santos, Rosenstrike, O'Malley, Vera, and Miocic, Cormier. Any other fights outside of those 4 big fights there? Are you seeing any value at the moment?
So I had a look at the undercard fights, and I think they might be bumping up the Jim Miller versus Pichel fight up to the main card now, because the Kutalaba versus Ankalaev fight was cancelled, wasn't it? Because Kutalaba tested positive for COVID. So I've had a look at that, and that was quite an interesting fight. Pichel's actually a year older than Miller, which is pretty crazy, because Jim Miller's been around. Seems like he's been around the UFC for about 10, 15 years. And we've seen Pichel fight 2 or 3 times. And interestingly, they both fought Roosevelt Roberts in the last fights as well. Pichel's was like a little over a year ago, and Miller's was a bit more recently, so they both got wins over him. And I think that's an interesting fight, because Miller's the underdog, and I'm not too sure if he should be the underdog. Both guys have decent stand-up, and I think Pichel's probably got a slight edge there. I think Pichel's cardio is probably slightly better over 3 rounds as well. But I'll give Miller quite a decent edge in the grappling, so I'm leaning towards backing Jim Miller there.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the odds now. I don't know what bookmaker this is with. I can look at it now. Yeah, I can. Pinnacle 2.09 actually for Jim Miller, and
he seems to have
1.8 for
drifted,
Pachel.
Yeah, he seems to be drifting, which sometimes that means something. Other times it's just it's kind of irrelevant. But I do like Miller there. And on the exchange, you'll probably get like 2.15, possibly 2.2 if the odds keep drifting. So yeah, I don't mind that. I think there's some value there.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing now Matchbook 2.06,
Right.
and also there's bookies that have got him as low as 1.88. I mean, Marathon Bet is 1.89. Jim Miller and Pinnacle at 2.09 is the highest I can see. So these are big discrepancies here. So it's I guess the market's very undecided at the moment. But yeah, you would think. I mean, off the top of my head, I'm not going to say that I watch every Jim Miller fight, but Vince Pichel, like you would think he's not really up there in terms of the opponents he's beat before.
No, he's not fought the same caliber of opposition that Jim Miller's fought.
No, exactly. So, all right, cool, mate. And any others before we get into those main 4 fights?
That was the main one that I was looking at, really. It's quite a weak card, to be honest, outside of the top 2 fights. I mean, the top 2 fights are really good, like O'Malley versus Vera and obviously DC versus Miocic. But the undercard, there's like guys making their debuts and stuff like that, which is always a bit, hairy because you don't really know how they're going to perform. So I've kind of stuck more to the main card with this card.
Yeah. All right, mate. Well, let's kick it off with John Dodson versus Dashvili. Dodson at 3.0 on Pinnacle and Dashvili at 1.42. Dodson hasn't been that active the last couple of years, just looking at his record before. 2018, he lost to Rivera, but beat Pedro Munoz. Lost to Jan in 2019 by decision, who's now the champion, and he beat Nathaniel Wood earlier this year in March by knockout. So he's a bit up and down. He's a veteran though. And Merab, on the other hand, 3-fight winning streak, lots of hype around him coming out of Long Island. Sarah Longo Gym. I hear like the likes of Sterling and Weidman talking about him all the time, being the next big thing. But yeah, I've written down here that Dodson's probably the biggest name he's ever faced. So look at this fight, mate. What do you think?
Yeah, that's true. So initially I thought that the odds looked a bit big, but as I've kind of delved a bit deeper into it, I can see why Dvalishvili's being backed in. I mean, Dodson, like you say, he's fought the bigger names. He had a split decision loss to Marlon Moraes, I think, as well, and he's fought like John Lineker. So he's fought all the other guys you mentioned. He's fought kind of the cream of the crop in that division. He's done pretty well, but he's undersized for that division. Obviously, he fought Demetrius Johnson twice at flyweight, and Merab. I'll just call him Merab because it's easier than Dvalishvili. He's a pretty big guy for that weight class, and his style is pressure wrestling. He likes to push guys against the cage, which, like you said, it's a smaller cage, this one, so it's going to favour him. And I think Dodson's probably KO or bust because his output is not enough to win a decision unless he can drop Dvalishvili, and kind of have him wobbled. But I think he's looking, like he's going to need a KO or to find a finish. Otherwise, I think Dvalishvili is just going to wear on him. And also Dodson tires as well. Like I went back and watched a fight, like his most recent fights, but I went back and watched the Demetrius Johnson fights, and Johnson just tired him out by just being active. Pushing him against the cage, like going for takedowns, but then giving him up. But he just tired him out, and by the third round, you could see that Dodson was tired, and that was a prime Dodson as well. That was a long time ago, like 7 or 8 years ago. So he's in his mid-30s now, and it's a really tough matchup for him. So I think Merab's going to win this fight, and I think if you're looking at Merab, his odds are quite short now, but you can still get him by decision at like 1.7, which I think is pretty decent.
Yeah, I mean, talking about Dodson, he's one of those fighters where back in the day, like he's a very exciting guy to watch, mostly due to his athletic ability. But I guess an aging Dodson doesn't really suit an athletic kind of fighter. And like you said, smaller guy at 135, it's hard to see him go that well against a wrestler like Merab. Do you see any value at 1.42 there, considering small cage, wrestler, Dodson aging? Lots of hype around Merab. Like, would you say there's a price where you take him?
If he went back to about 1.5, I'd probably take him. I think he was like 1.55, I think, initially when the odds came out, so he's been backed into like 1.4. And Dodson's the bigger name, so there could be like some recreational money that'll come on him and push the price back out. So if Merab got back to about 1.5, I'd like to take those odds. But if you're backing Dodson, I'd probably just look at the KO line. I think that's about 6.0 around there. So that's pretty reasonable.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so if you're looking for some higher odds, maybe a Dodson knockout, Dashvili decision, like they're the two most likely outcomes for both fighters.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Merab, he is open to being hit. Like if you watch his fights, because he's so kind of like forward pressure heavy, he does leave himself open to get cracked. So Dodson could land that big left and put him out.
All right, cool, mate. Move on. Junior Dos Santos versus Yair Rozenstruik. Is that his Jazeer? How do you pronounce that? I can't remember.
Is it Jairzinho, I think?
Jairzinho, yeah.
Jairzinho Rozenstruik, I think.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Yair Rodriguez. I'm such an idiot. But
Yair Rodriguez, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, Dos Santos at 2.1 and Rozenstruik at 1.79. For me, this is just a classic heavyweight fight. Both could get knocked out. Both can knock out. I mean, in this kind of bet, do you just play the bigger odds, or do you just completely stay out?
Yeah, it's a tough one, really. It's like obviously both guys are coming off KO losses. So Rozenstruik got knocked out pretty brutally by Ngannou. And that wasn't that long ago. That was in the COVID era. So he's had like only a few months to recover from what was a pretty vicious knockout. And then Dos Santos got knocked out by Curtis Blades in his last fight. So both guys are coming back from KO. So it'll be interesting, really. It could mean that both are quite tentative. They might kind of stay at range, not really want to engage too much. So that's something I kind of looked at, looking at like the decision lines for both fighters. JDS has been around for a long time. He's took a lot of beatings. His chin. I don't think his chin is as good as it was once, and he does look in great shape. Though I don't know if you've seen pictures of him recently.
Yeah.
He's looking pretty ripped up, but whether that'll like affect his cardio or make him more explosive, I don't think so. I think he's at that age now where he's just gonna kind of decline fight after fight. So it's a really tough one. Like if JDS would use some grappling, then I'd be a bit more inclined to bet him, just because Jairzinho Rozenstruik has shown that's like a bbig weakness of his. That's a big hole. Like when he fought Alistair Overeem was constantly able to kind of get him on his back and control positions there. So in a 3-round fight, if you could trust JDS to do that, I'd want to back him, but I don't think he will. I think he'll be happy just to stand up and box, really. And when it's like that, it's Rozenstruik still probably got the better chin, so I can see why the odds are how they are, really.
I would say though, if I had to pick who's like the better mixed martial artist, you'd have to say Dos Santos.
Definitely.
Yeah. In the heavyweights, it doesn't matter really, does it? It doesn't. It's just who connects first. If someone does connect.
Yeah. And I think that Rozenstruik's a bit quicker as well. I think he gets his shots off a bit faster now. Obviously, he's got that kickboxing background. He will have a better kicking game than JDS. So, unless JDS lands something big. Like I say, if you could trust JDS to kind of push him against the cage, look for takedowns, then he could win rounds that way. I'd look at these odds and think they were pretty decent value. But like you say, he likes his boxing, he likes his stand-up fights, and I don't think he's going to do that. So it's an avoid for me. I think he'll just stay away from that fight.
Yeah, it's just one of those classic heavyweight fights where it could go either way. Another exciting fight on the main card, I assume. O'Malley versus Vera. So much hype around Sean O'Malley coming into this one. He's at 1.36 and Marlon Vera at 3.3. So coming into this fight, Vera's lost to Song Yadong. He was on a 3-fight winning streak, and it was actually quite a controversial decision. Lots of people thinking that Vera had actually won the fight. So you could make the argument that he's kind of on a 4-fight winning streak, and O'Malley, the much advertised 12-0 record, mate. What do you think about this one? I think I saw a tweet you put out maybe last week that you were interested in Marlon Vera at the price he's at now. Yeah,
so I backed him a few weeks ago at 3.75 because I thought that was way too wide. I would have it much closer. I'd probably have him like 2.8, possibly like three at the biggest. I think would be like the biggest odds I'd have Vera at. And I think with O'Malley, it's kind of like we talked about in the last podcast. Sometimes you get these narratives and people just run with them, and then there becomes like a hype train. And O'Malley's definitely getting that, that UFC hype that it could be warranted, but you would need a few more wins against decent level competition to kind of warrant the odds that he's getting now. I mean, he's come back since his suspension, and he's beat Jose Quinones and who did he fight? Oh, Wineland. Right. So it's not like he's knocking guys out, but he's not knocking out like top tier competition. And Marlon Vera has been in there with some pretty good guys. Like Song Yadong's a really good fighter. He's talked about as a potential title challenger. He's been in there with like Brad Pickett and John Lineker. So he's fought some really good guys, and he's a guy that shows improvement, like fight to fight as well. So I just think these odds are way too wide, to be honest.
For everyone out there, I mean, most people know Sean O'Malley's very striker-based, haven't seen his wrestling tested too much so far. Can you kind of explain where Marlon Vera would be able to exploit Sean O'Malley with his style?
Yeah, definitely. So I think early on he's probably going to struggle a bit because O'Malley is very explosive and he uses a lot of movement and he's quite rangy. While Marlon's kind of more like he's got a plodding style, but he'll be consistent for 3 rounds. While O'Malley will tend to drop off just because his style is so kind of movement heavy. So I think early on he's probably going to struggle. And if you want to live bet the fight, I imagine that after round 1 you'll probably get Vera at bigger odds. But I think as the fight progresses, Vera's going to be able to close that distance a lot easier. Like I say, it's a smaller cage. He's very good in the clinch as well. His clinch work was really good in the last fight against Song Yadong. He's landing good knees and landing good elbows. And I think he's just going to be able to wear on O'Malley. And O'Malley, he can win the fight, obviously, but the odds are just way too wide. And Vera's really durable as well. He's never been stopped. He's a guy that Song Yadong's a big puncher and he was, eating his shots. So it's going to be a really good fight to me. And Vera's got a decent kicking game as well. He can land them leg kicks. And if you watch O'Malley's fights, he's very heavy on his front foot, like McGregor. He kind of has that style. So if Marlon Vera can land a few decent leg kicks, then O'Malley could be in trouble.
Mate, it made me a lot more excited for this fight now. I'll be getting the Sport Market account out, ready for this fight, ready to do some live betting. 3.3 for Vera now. Is that something you look at trading more? I mean, you've already got 3.7 or 3.75, whatever you said. You'd be pretty happy with that right now. You looking at ARB out of that?
I'd still take those odds. Yeah, I'd still take like 3.3. I think that's good value. I saw on the exchange this morning, it's 3.5, so you could still get that. There might be some slow books as well. Yesterday, Sky Bet still had Marlon Vera at 3.75. Or you could look at Marlon Vera by decision. That's probably a decent bet as well. I think that was up like near 6, 7, something like that. So, I'd still, be happy to back Marlon Vera anything above 3.0. Really, I think you get really good value.
Okay, cool, mate. Main event, big one. The trilogy, Miocic, Cormier. This one's been touted for a long time now. I guess their last fight was about a year ago. And nothing's happened in the heavyweight title fight scenario ever since. So these guys are waiting out the trilogy, and it's a bloody... The betting market for this is really interesting, really interesting, because I've seen... I mean, when it first came out 2 months ago, I think Cormier might have moved into favourite, and then I think Miocic moved into favourite. Earlier this week, they were completely even. And now there's been a decent move for Cormier again. So Miocic 1.99 and Cormier at 1.88 on Pinnacle at the moment. For those who don't know, Cormier knocked out Miocic in the first round of their first fight, won the title, and then they rematched probably a year after that, I would say. And Miocic won in the 4th round by those brutal body strikes. But the interesting thing was that if you scored that fight, Cormier probably won the first 3 rounds. Maybe you could argue over the 3rd round. I rewatched it the other day. But the shots, the shots both fighters were taking, but especially the shots Miocic was taking, I cannot believe he didn't go down once. He didn't really even seem rocked at all. So what are your thoughts on this one, mate? This is very interesting.
Yeah, well, I've kind of gone back and forth, much like the betting market on this one. I was initially favouring Miocic, and then I started to favour Cormier, and then went back to Miocic. It's a really tough fight to call. Like you say, in the first fight, DC just caught him cold, I suppose, caught him early. And then the second fight was probably like a better representation of what the third fight's going to look like. That was a bit more back and forth. And like you said, Cormier looked really, really good in that second fight. He looked a lot sharper on the feet. He was landing big shots, but Stipe was just managing to take him. And he used his wrestling in the first round as well, dumped him, got him on his back. And then Stipe just kind of found that chink in the armour. He found those body shots, and that was the end of it, really. So there's a lot of questions really going into this fight. And, now that Stipe kind of knows where he can hurt Cormier with those body shots, is that going to be, a bigger part of his strategy from the start of the fight, which you'd probably think would be yes. And then how does Cormier kind of react to that as well? Is he going to change his strategy? Because he's always kind of been a little bit weak to the body when he fought John Jones. John Jones was attacking his body with kicks. I don't know if you remember the Anderson Silva fight, but Anderson Silva hurt him with a body kick as well. So that has shown to be, one of his weaknesses. He has said that he's going to wrestle a lot more in this fight. And like I said, with a smaller cage, that could come into play as well. But he's 41 years old now, so he's not a young man, and I'm not sure if he can rely on like a wrestling heavy approach for 5 rounds. It's it's tough to do it, and the way that he kind of picks guys up and dumps, and that takes a lot of energy. I don't know. It's a really tough fight. What are your opinions? Are you leaning either way?
Well, I've already bet Cormier, but I'm still on the. It's such a tough one to pick. I mean, I got Cormier earlier in the week at 1.98, so it's value. I've taken value right now, but there's 2 ways I look at it. One, Cormier has gotten older, and also those body shots. Like I kind of compare it to Volkanovski versus Max Holloway, because after the first fight, it was so obvious that Max Holloway had to change something because of those leg kicks. Yeah. And it's the exact same scenario here. Cormier has to be able to defend those body shots better. And Max Holloway was able to do that in the Volkanovski situation. But then towards later in the fight, Volkanovski started using other weapons and ways to win the fight. And then in this fight, I wonder the same thing. Like, is DC going to be able to stop the body shot early, and then is Stipe going to go, oh, okay, well, he's clearly blocking the body shot now, and now I can exploit other things. Like, I would love to ask you about that. Do you think, I mean, Daniel's such a smart fighter, that's the thing. You would think that he's thinking a few steps ahead, so he's thinking, all right, Stipe's not going to be able to get the body shot, so I'm going to try and do this, but then, so he's going to try that, and then I'm going to, you know what I mean? Like, they're thinking about, like, what's the next step after the body shot?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose one way you can negate that is with his wrestling. If he can make it a clinch-heavy fight and close that distance quicker, then Stipe's not gonna have the opportunity to land those shots to the body. But I don't know, it's like you say, it's so tough. It's almost like there's levels of thinking, almost like in poker. Like this guy's thinking this, so I'm gonna think this, but he knows that I know that. It's like there's so many levels to it that it's,
they're both such smart fighters, mate. So you know that that's the way they might be thinking too. But I guess if you step back and think about it from the most like logical perspective, you think that Stipe, you would think that he wants this to be a distance fight, I guess similar to like a John Jones. He wants this to be all about the jab, keep him on the outside, because as soon as you bring Cormier in, that's scary. You bring in wrestling, clinch, like Cormier's a beast when it comes to that. So you'd think Cormier probably wants to get as close as he could, which is what he did in the second fight for those first couple of rounds, and he succeeded brilliantly. And Miocic probably wants to keep him on the end of his jab. So it's just about who imposes that kind of game plan better.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like when I've looked at it, I just said if either side would reach like 2.2, 2.3 range, I'd just bet that fighter, because it's like a coin flip fight really. So even like if Cormier takes the first round with wrestling heavy approach and like Miocic is like 2.3, 2.4 after round 1, then I'd probably back him, because we've kind of seen in the second fight that Stipe was the one that was stronger going later on. So yeah, for me, it's either I'm just going to wait until a lot of money comes on one side or the other, which it might do. It looks like Cormier is getting backed quite decently. So if Miocic would reach like odds of 2.2, I'd take him. Otherwise, I'll just leave it and maybe look in play.
There also might be a bit of fan money on Cormier, because ever since that last fight, he's one of the biggest names in mixed martial arts in terms of media, podcasts. Like, he just does the podcast now with Ariel Helwani every Monday, and it's like, it's probably like the biggest MMA podcast out there. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's lots of fan money on Cormier too. But the reason I did bet Cormier was just off the fact that if you took the balance of play from the first two fights, you would have to say Cormier is probably the better fighter, although he looked incredibly vulnerable in our lasting impression is Cormier getting absolutely chewed up. But if you take the balance of play from all 5 rounds of their fighting, Cormier has been better.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's just his age as well. Like, if Cormier was like 36, 37, then I'd probably be more inclined to back him. But, he's 41 now, and as you get older, plus, he does carry quite a bit of weight on him. So I just think as he gets older, that's probably going to have more of an impact. It's just so tough, like I say.
He says he's addressed the cardio issue too. He has said that he's been, his cardio is really good and all that kind of stuff. And, I mean, he went 5 rounds.
But was it a cardio issue, though? Yeah, but I don't know if it was a cardio issue, because he looked great the first 3 rounds, and then after those body shots, he just dropped off completely. So I don't know if, it was a cardio issue, or it was the fact that Stipe was just ripping them body shots off. I mean, how many did he land? Like 7 or 8,
It was ridiculous.
You can blame it on your cardio, but...
I mean, watching it again the other day, I just... it was interesting too, because going into the 4th round, I was like, here we go, I can't wait to see these body shots again. But it didn't actually happen until, I think, 2 or 3 minutes into the 4th round. So all those body shots were like within like a minute or 2 of each other, those 7 or 8 body shots, and eventually he went to the head and finished him off. And with that finish too, I know this isn't really betting related at all. That was one of the most accurate finishes I've seen in a long time. Like Stipe's ability to, because Cormier was rocked, but he wasn't out. He was still able to stand up, and he was trying to do stuff to fend him off. But Stipe's precision with some of those shots was incredible.
Yeah, and then in the 4th round as well, where he'd gone through a really tough fight. So I think that says a lot about Stipe's cardio and fight IQ, and just his resilience as well. Which is, like I say, if the money does keep coming on DC, then I probably would take a bet on Miocic. But it's just going to be a really good fight. It's just going to be one that, even if I don't have a bet on it, it's, you're still going to get the goosebumps when you watch it. It's going to, it's going to be really good.
I mean, you can make the argument it's the greatest fight of in heavyweight history for the UFC. They could, I mean, they're arguably the 2 best heavyweights ever.
Yeah. What? I mean, JDS versus Kane, that was a decent trilogy as well. That was really similar as well, wasn't it? Because you had a really quick knockout in the first fight, and then the second fight was a better representation of what the third fight was. So, I can't wait for it. It's going to be good.
Yeah, no, I can't wait, mate. It'll be a shame it's on at the ungodly hours for us, but we'll stick through. We're pretty used to it by now, but hopefully next time after this one, I'll be watching them from Australia, which is a beautiful time of Sunday midday. So
is it nice?
Yeah, it's brilliant, mate. The main cards normally start at about 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. So if you're if you're like me, you get up in the morning, watch the replay of the Arsenal game from Saturday night, and then you just follow on to the prelims of the UFC. So
nice.
Hopefully I'll be watching it from Australia in a couple of weeks. But mate, awesome chat. I'm very, very excited, especially about that last fight, Miocic, Cormier. People that want to check out what you're doing, mate, I assume you'd want to promote smartsportstrader.com, your blog, your journey from, I don't know where you started, but 0 to a million. See how quickly you can get to £1 million, and follow you at SM Sports Trader on Twitter. Is that all good?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Cheers.
No
it's
worries,
probably going to be about, I think it'll be about 30 years before I hit the $1 million mark, the way things are going. But nearly at 100k though, so it's we're getting there.
That should be the quiz question, mate. How long is it going to take for Ryan to get all the way to $1 million? All right. Well, talking of the quiz, we'll get to the answer, mate. Can you name the 3 fighters that have beat Stipe Miocic?
Yeah. So DC, obviously the most recent one. He had that really good fight with JDS, probably one of the best fights, heavyweight fights ever. That was a great 5-round fight. And then early on in his career, Stefan Struve stopped him, which was, it's pretty crazy when you think about it now, because at that time, people thought after that win, Stefan Struve might go on and be something in the heavyweight division, but it never really happened. And Miocic was the one that's gone on, and he's going to go down as one of the best heavyweights ever. So yeah, it's an odd one, that one.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, and Stefan's had all those problems with his heart too since then. So they've almost gone in polar opposite directions. But yeah, and I remember the JDS fight. That was I think I backed JDS, and that was just on the back of his. I think he just come off the Kane loss. Sorry, if I'm correct. Looking back, it was one of the stupidest bets I've ever made, I think, because it wasn't trending too well, and I think he got lucky with the decision, possibly, but my memory is not that great. But yeah, mate, quiz question correct. I'll have to get something a bit harder for you next time. But yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. Podcast that's coming next, not too sure. Actually, no, I do know what's coming out. We're talking with Neil Shah, who's actually written content for both Trademate blog and also for Ryan. He's basically a professional sports bettor who's only just started or just gone professional in the last couple of months. So I actually had a chat to him about the journey, the kind of mentality, psychological side of things. It was a really interesting chat. Didn't really go through much betting strategy, but more so just talking about what it's like going from basically quitting your full-time job, going straight into professional sports betting. So it was a really interesting chat, and I really enjoyed it. But other than that, thanks for listening, everyone. Make sure you do a quick rate and review of the podcast and subscribe to us wherever you listen to our podcast. And if you're looking to implement some of the strategies we looked at today, more so the value betting ones, we don't have MMA or UFC in the Trademate Sports software at the moment, but there's plenty of other ways you can find value on the other sports we cover. Go and start a free week trial of Trademate Sports and start your value betting journey. But thanks again for coming on, mate.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
All right, see you guys.